What's going on YouTube? Evan here with Cloud9 Aquariums. Hope you guys had a great holiday. Today is New Year's, so I figured let's celebrate New Year's by talking about the nitrogen cycle. Now I know this doesn't sound very exciting to some of you, but this is pretty big stuff, okay? This is really what makes your tank run. If you don't have a good grasp of the cycle, then your tank is just gonna be one nightmare after another. And this is really honestly what gets all those beginners out of the hobby. So, pay attention. I hope I can break it down for you pretty simply. There's a lot of more scientific I can get with this, but I'm not going to do it. I feel like you just need to have a basic concept of it, because this is what helps you balance your tank. So, the nitrogen cycle. Now what I'm talking about from the nitrogen cycle is something where we're going from a bad chemical, like ammonia, to a good chemical, like nitrate. Now, fish are a lot more susceptible to ammonias than they are to nitrates. Now if you have a high level of nitrates in your water, your fish aren't going to do well. And the only way to get rid of nitrates is either through the absorption with plants or by doing water changes. Okay, so there's no way to get around doing water changes. Don't go telling your friends that, oh, this guy online told me that there's a way that I can never do water changes again. Okay, that's a lie. It's not going to happen. Big water changes, they're great, okay? But between water changes, we want our tanks to be doing fantastic. So, your fish put out ammonia. In their excrement, you also get ammonia from breaking down dead matter like leaves from your plants, and also from the breaking down of food. So if you overfeed your fish, you're just adding more ammonia to the water. Not to mention, the more you feed them, the more ammonia they're going to put in the water too. So, this is why we don't overfeed our fish. We want to break that ammonia down into nitrates. Now to get from ammonia to nitrate, you have to go through the nitrogen cycle. And basically what we need to do is we need to have bacteria growing in our tank, in our filters, that's going to break down the ammonia into nitrites, and then it will go on to nitrates. Now, this may sound complicated, it's really not. Okay, these bacteria love to grow in our tank. All we gotta do is a couple little steps to grow them, and it's fantastic. So starting out with a brand new tank, what are your options to get this cycle started? Well, you got three major options. You can do the fishless cycle, you can do the fish cycle, or you can do the pre-existing media cycle. Now, all of these work very well, depending upon how humane you are. Most of you will not go towards the fishing cycle. But I'm going to talk about that because that's the first way that most beginners are going to try to start their tank. Now, this may seem easy where you can just throw a fish in a tank, but people wonder why. They throw in 10 fish in a tank. The water looks clear, everything looks great. They put their little chlorine, little dechlorinator in there, and they think they're set. They're all set to go. Then their fish are dead a couple days later. Well, this is because their tank hasn't been cycled. And what happened is they get an ammonia spike, and the fish can't handle, and they all die. So, how do we not get an ammonia spike? Well, to not get an ammonia spike, you have to go through a cycle. So basically, the best way to do a fish cycle is to start out with a low number of fish, okay? Because the more fish you have in the tank, the more ammonia they're going to put into the water. So you want to give that water a long time to spike. So if you're going to do a fish cycle, this is how I would do it. I've done it before. It's very possible you can be humane about it and not kill fish. This is what you do. You buy a very hardy fish. Now, for me, I really like zebra dinos. In fact, I will prove to you that it works because I still have a zebra dino way in the back right there that actually came from when I cycled this tank about 1.5 years ago. And he's still going strong. So that buddy is what turned this tank into what it is right now, believe it or not. So that's the fish cycle. You can put in, I would put in like 3 or 4 very hardy species. Zebra dinos especially are the best. Guppies also work. Some people go for platies. But I would really recommend zebra dinos. You put a couple of them in. You just run the tank like you normally would. And then after about 2 weeks, you can add some more. Now, this is all assuming that you're checking your chemicals, your ammonia is not spiking anymore. If you have the nitrite and nitrate test kits, you're going to see it's going to go through a phase where it's going to spike. And after about 2 weeks, it's all going to level out, and that's when you finally got your bacteria growing, and it's awesome. Once from there on out, we're all set to go. Another way to cycle a tank is the fishless cycle. This is a lot more humane. You won't kill any fish doing this one, assuming you wait long enough to do it. Sometimes it's going to also be faster too. And then remember, all these can be mixed together too, so you could do all three at once. But the fishless cycle you can buy a Bacteria Starter at the fish store. There's a couple different brands out there. I'm not going to get specific with any of them. I think they all work pretty well. But all you do is you pour a little bit of it in. It's going to get that bacteria started going in your tank, and you're just going to run your tank for however long it says. Usually, for my cycles, I usually wait a minimum of 2 weeks. Some people will say 2 months. I wouldn't go that far. Usually, after 2 weeks, you're set. You're pretty much set. But it really just depends on the tank, what you're putting in it, and look at the numbers. If you have the test kits, especially get some test kits. You know, they're expensive at first, but you really don't go through them very fast, and they're really worth it, especially when you're just getting into the hobby and you can't just eyeball it. The other way to cycle a tank is with pre-existing media. Now this is the greatest thing. If you have friends, not fish stores, if you have friends who have fish tanks, ask them if you can have some of their dirty filter media. I'm sure they would love to give you their, if they're just going to throw it out anyways, I'm sure they would love to give it to you. Now what that's going to do for you is that's going to be the same thing as like a fishless cycle, where you can just put that in your filter, and now that's going to introduce bacteria to your water, which is very great. That's actually kind of my preferred method, but I actually like to do with fish too, because I feel like a tank is just sitting there is really boring. So think about it. I like to do zebra danios with some pre-existing media, and if you're really impatient, you can put in some of the Bacteria Starter too. But the key right here is you're going to see when you're doing your tests, your ammonia is going to spike, and then it's going to go down, and then your nitrate's going to spike, and that's going to go down, and then your nitrates are going to spike, and then finally it's going to level off. And that's when you've reached Cloud 9 and it's blissful. So you have to watch out for that. You're going to have to do some water changes in the process. One thing that I'm going to talk about, because I do dirted tanks too, is if you're going to cycle a dirted tank, first off, this really isn't for beginners. Dirted tank cycling is really frustrating, okay? So if you've never had a tank before and you try to start up a dirted tank, be wary. Be very wary. You may or may not hate it. So, but here's my 2 cents on it. If you're going to do a dirted tank, you need to plant it instantly. So you put the dirt in, you put the water in it, and you plant it. Same day. First thing, you have to. If you're not going to plant it, do not turn the lights on until your tank is fully cycled. The reason I say this is because otherwise you are going to have the most ridiculous algae bloom you have ever seen. The reason for that is when you initially put the water in and you have this dirt, that dirt is just going to leach all these excess nutrients into the water column. Now if you don't have plants to take out those excess nutrients, guess what's going to take them up? Algae. And it's going to go crazy. You probably have every imaginable kind of algae growing in your tank by the end of the first week. So if you're not going to plant it, heavily plant it within the first day or two. Don't turn your lights on. Don't even give it the option. In fact, cover it up with a black sheet. Seriously, don't screw around with it, because once you have that algae going, it's a pain in the butt to try to get rid of. So do yourself a favor. Another thing too, if you're going to do a dirted tank, over those first 2 weeks that you're cycling your tank, you're going to want to do at least 3 water changes. You're going to want to do big ones. You're going to want to do at least 75%. Okay? So 75%, at least 3 times, and that's really what will save you from having the extreme algae breakout. If you're just cycling one of the other methods, you don't have a dirted tank, over 2 weeks I would do at least 2 water changes. So after the first week, do a water change. After second week, do a water change. And I would do at least 25%. Most of my water changes, even now, are usually I usually do about 25 to 50%. So I don't play games when it comes to water changes. I believe big water changes is the key to happy fish and not having ridiculous amounts of algae. So cycling is really important. This is what keeps your tanks running. I know I've already done a thing on filtration. I was talking about your biological, and that's exactly what I'm talking about with cycling too. When I'm talking about your biological media, you want that bacteria to grow in your filter. That's because that bacteria is just doing a nitrogen cycle for you, and it makes your life a lot easier when you don't have ammonia spikes. Because believe me, if you have an ammonia spike, either A, your tank is not cycled, or B, you have way too many fish in there, and you're just going to see belly up after belly up, and it's just going to be awful, and it's going to be really frustrating. So, take my advice, cycle your tank. Take your time cycling it. when I say 2 weeks, that's minimum, okay? If you can do a month, please, by all means, do a month. You're going to see in the cycle, you're going to see, the 3 spikes like I talked about, but you also may see a phase where the water will become cloudy. Don't freak out. It's not a big deal. A lot of times when it's going through some of those phases of the swings, of the spiking, it will become cloudy. You'll also see it clear up on its own after that. If it doesn't, again, those water changes will take care of it. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a concept of cycling. There's a lot of information out there for it. Everybody's got their own little concept of it, but I gave you the 3 main ideas of what people are really into when it comes to cycling your tanks. I'm sure there's some other crazy stuff to do. One thing I'm gonna just quick touch on too, which I almost forgot about. When I say pre-existing media, and I specifically mentioned not fish stores. The reason you don't want to take their media is because there could be a lot of disease in that, because they have such a high turnover rate. Now, nothing against fish stores, obviously we all buy our fish from there, but they get exposed to a lot of stuff, and you don't want that kind of media in a brand new tank. The last thing you want is to get your brand new fish in a barely cycled tank and then have a giant outbreak of ick or something just awful you don't have to fight. So that's why I say go to your friends who have a well-established tank and ask if you can have some of their media, or even just some of their gravel to start out with too, because again, that bacteria can be growing on your gravel, it could be growing in your filter. So that's my 2 cents. I hope this gives you just a little bit of a concept of it. And Happy New Year's, people. This is going to be a fun year, so stick with it. And I hope this brings you and your fish tanks a little bit closer to Cloud 9.